from your expertise. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for this intro, and let me share my screen so we can see my presentation deck here. So can everyone see my screen here? Okay. So hi everyone, thanks for joining tonight. Yeah, it's a Friday night. I hope like you can learn something from this talk. So today we are going to talk about the most like popular like interview session, which is how to prepare for the behavioral question at your upcoming product design interview. And before we going to the detail, I want to say like all these kind of like lessons or interview question or anything around like how to handle the behavioral questions is coming from my personal like interview experience. So it doesn't reflect on any of my like current employer and peers like employers, which means this will be a very honest conversation where I want to share all my lessons I was learning from my how I prepare for my behavior question in the past. So let's jump into the agenda today. Definitely in the beginning, I will briefly talk about my design journey, and then I will give an overview about what is a behavior question and what kind of framework I'm using to handle the behavior question. And I also have a few of the slides where I summarize what is the most common behavior interview question you will encounter. And I will also talk about what is my like secret sauce for successfully answering and preparing for this behavioral question. And then we might have like 10 to 15 minutes left for the Q&A session. Cool. So let's start with my journey. So when I was a little girl, I really enjoying drawing, and I always want to become an artist or designer in the future. And definitely like at that time, my parents, they didn't want me to become an artist because they feel like it's hard to make the money on my own in the future. So but for my younger self, I really want to do something related to design, but I didn't know how I can reach my goal. So my younger self didn't know that to reach this goal, I actually go through 3 different degrees in different school and different major. So first I start in China's, where I got my bachelor degree in Chinese literature and language. And then I went to the state and I start learning science and technology at University of Pennsylvania. And finally, I went to the school, like University of Washington, Seattle, where I got my master's degree in human computer interaction and design, which is the UX design and research related major. So after I graduated from the UW, I start to looking for my job and start my career as a UX and product designer. And fortunately, I got a job at Wayfair, where I start to work as a product designer for our warehousing team, where I'm designing this mobile and desktop application for warehouse worker to help these people complete their daily job and tasks efficiently and safety. And then I moved to a larger company like Amazon, where I'm working on the Amazon Prime team. And I was the UX designer that working on multiple like projects, help our global Prime member understand what is included in their Prime benefit and how we can help them engage with their Prime membership. So after my amazing years at Amazon, I landed my job in Microsoft Vancouver office. So right now I am the designer at Microsoft, working on the multimedia image and video search on Bing. So basically, if you are opening up the Bing search and you go to the image and video vertical, this is my team's working on. And outside my daily job as a designer, I really enjoying food and coffee, and always looking for like authentic local coffee shop when I traveling in the state or in Canada. So this is my brief journey about how I get into the design. And then like I want to talk about the main things of the behavioral question. So what is the behavioral question? So behavioral question is the most important and common interview session you will encounter. And during the behavioral question sessions, it is a great way to evaluate not just your hard skill, such as your interaction design, visual design, this kind of essential skill set as a product and UX designer, but also it's a perfect time for you to share and show you soft skill as a UX designer. I want to say for these behavioral question sessions, it's largely like evaluating your soft skill set than the hard skill set, because for your previous portfolio presentation, it is a great way to share and show your design work so they can evaluate your hard skill in a more deeper way. But for the behavioral question, it's perfect time to evaluate your soft skill. So what is the soft skill they are looking for? It include like the communication. How do you communicate with your peer, cross-functional partner, your manager, and other? And how do you work with these people? And beyond the communication and collaboration, they also will evaluate, like, do you have the self-awareness? Do you know about your strengths? Do you know about what is your weakness? So they might also ask this question as well. And the other thing like I want to highlight here is it's also a time for them to evaluate how do you drive the project? How did you become more like the owner who can take the ownership and solve the problem and move forward with your project, with your design project in your daily works? So so this is something like they want to evaluate during your behavioral question. I think keeping these kind of skill set in mind will help you to prepare your own like question and story later on, because you can think about like, it is this example or story I prepare for highlight this particular skill set they are looking for. And so during this interview question, not only like the hiring manager will ask the behavioral question, but also your peer, the UX or product designer on the team will also get a chance to ask this behavioral question. And more importantly, the cross-functional team, such as the product manager, engineers, or even like the data scientists, they will have the one-on-one session with you to ask this behavioral question. And also like if you are interview with more like a mature design team, you might also get a one-on-one conversation with the UX researcher and the content or the content strategy on the team during your behavior questions session. And usually based on my personal experience, this kind of one-on-one session with individual, like either the manager, like PM, engineer, or other designer, it will take like 45 minutes to an hour long. And sometimes, like based on my experience, the behavioral question also happening at the end of your portfolio presentation, especially like we might have like 10 or 5 minutes left for each of your portfolio presentation. The designer or the hiring managers who are watching your entire portfolio presentation, they might also ask you some behavioral question based on your project. And the other thing is like usually like the behavioral question session, the one-on-one session is happening after you complete your portfolio presentation, which means some of the designer or the engineer or PM, they might ask you some follow-up behavioral question based on the project you present. And I will talk about like what kind of project you might encounter during this session later on, but just keep this in mind. And the other thing I always want to highlight is if you are not sure about like what we are going to expect during the end of portfolio review or during the one-on-one session. Definitely double check with your recruiter before you going into this interview, because some of the one-on-one session, they might not become the behavioral question. They might be app critique session or the whiteboarding session. So make sure you double check with the recruiter to understand what you are going to expect during the one-on-one session with these different folks. And then, so by understanding like what is the behavioral question overall and what kind of skill set they are evaluating, we can go into the most commonly used framework for answering the behavior question, which is the STAR methods. So I think the STAR methods is perfectly great framework to be used in like tell me about a time, this kind of format, especially when anyone asks you about tell me about a time when you did something. It's always about how did you deal with the conflict, disagreement, or failures. Every time when people ask you tell me about the time, it's always about this kind of thing. How did you handle the challenge, handle this difficulty when you were working on any of your project before? So what is the STAR method here? So the STAR method is representing four things: situation, text, actions, and results. So let's jump into the situation. And I will also like give an example later on, like when we go into the common interview session. So right now I just share like the overview of the STAR method framework. So what is a situation? Situation means before you go into like what did you do for that project, you should give the interviewer a briefly overview about what kind of project you were working on, especially what is your role and what is the team structure look like and what is the overall timeline. So here will help the interviewer understand the project you are going to dive deep later on. And the second is because the project we are working on sometimes might be very broad. So make sure that you describe clearly about what kind of task or what kind of specific challenge you had before during this project. How did you, like what kind of challenge you were tackling with for this specific project? And then after you talk about like the project overview and the text, you can go into the action. So I think this is the most important part for on the STAR methods framework, where you should describe very specifically about what step you were taking and what kind of solution you were proposing, and then you help the team or help your company move forward with the projects. So after you talk about the actions, make sure that you talk about the result. I think this is the result part is something I was struggling a lot before, because sometimes I didn't know about like specific metric for this project or what kind of result I have from this project I want to highlight here. So here I summarize for the results, not just you can highlight what is the project result, like how many user retention rate did this project increase, this kind of more like the business metric you help to increase. But also you can using more likely the positive user feedback you got from the user testing or any user interview session to highlight the result. And you can also use the positive feedback from your stakeholder from your team as a result. For example, if you solve a team collaboration problem, you can use the result from maybe one of your PM or the code from one of your PM or engineer to highlight how successful you solve these problems to promote like team collaboration. Also, the other thing I want to say is for the results part, also trying to think about what is the personal learning or lessons you got by doing this project, because this learning you share here can be also taking into your next role or next career. So if you talk about your learning here, trying to make the connection between what I learned from my previous project can bring into my next project where I'm going to do in my future role here in this company. So this is my explanation for the STAR methods. And then let's jump into the meaty part of this presentation. What is the most common interview like questions? So I think for the rest of the question is I collected during my previous interview experience. So I will encourage all of us to maybe take a screenshot right now, but we have a recording later on, but if you want to take a screenshot, feel free to do. And the other thing I want to share is in the future, like whenever you have a new behavior question you ever encounter during your interview, make sure that you document your behavior question as well, and trying to think about the answer and finalize the answer for that new behavior question. Because for me, my strategy is always about I collect the most common behavior questions, and then like every time if I meet if I know or come up with a new behavior question, I will add this behavior question to my like interview behavior question libraries, so I can build up more knowledge and feel less anxious every time if I answering the behavior question. So when handling this behavior question, make sure about like you understanding your interviewer, like who is your interviewer will be impact, will largely impact on what kind of question you are going to expect it during your behavior question. So I will definitely here, I also emphasize, definitely collect the behavior question in advance and prepare the story before you go into this session. So what I mentioned earlier is during this behavioral question, we will chat with the peer designer, head manager, PM engineer, or sometimes UX researcher or content strategy. So what's this designer interviewer looking for when they have this kind of one-on-one session with you during the interview session? So what I'm summarizing here is most likely the designer friends they are looking for you is the hard skill, what kind of the essential skill or industrial knowledge you have in UX and product design or even UX research. And then the second part that you build is definitely in the soft skill as well. So how do you communicate and collaborate with the design as well as other cross-functional team? So these are a list of the simple question. Feel free to take the screenshot here about like what kind of question you might encounter when the designer asks the question during your behavioral sessions. So this 4 bullet point is more likely about the collaboration and communication question around the behavior session. Like how do you work with the designer on the team, and how do you share your design work, and how do you receive or give feedback to other design folks? Because in our daily jobs, it's really critical for us to share our design works for transparency, as well as getting some critical design feedback from the peer designer. So these are the most common questions for collaboration and communication when the designer friends ask these questions. And the other part is sometimes the designer, they will ask you the project related question. It's more about like, what if you are given more time and resource on this project, what would you do differently? So it will be related to a specific project, especially if you have this one-on-one session after your portfolio review session. And if they don't have time to ask this question during the during the portfolio review session, they might save this kind of project related question for your later one-on-one session. And sometimes the designer will also ask you like, what is the most difficult problems you were trying to solve during this project? Sometimes they might ask more specifically, like, what is the most difficult interaction design problems you were trying to solve for this project? And sometimes they also curious about like, how did you do the UX research or UX or usability testing for your previous project? And they will also ask you a question like, how what did you learn from your past project, and how did you deal with the conflict if you are working with the PM or engineer for this project? I think as a designer, we're always curious about the candidate, like how they working not just with the design team, but also with the PM and engineer, these key stakeholder as well. So let's do a quick like Intext session. I wonder, like, if you are currently in the interview, how do you answer this question? Like, how do you work with the peer designer on the team? So feel free to share your experience on the chat. And I can also share my sample answer later. So feel free to type in on the chat, and we can, I just want to see like how all of you like answer this question. If one of the designer asks this question during your behavior question interview.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to participate. And what I'll do is I will take the first 3 answers and we'll run it through Minjun. We are not looking for the perfect answer. We're trying to learn from Minjun to make it perfect. So don't have the anxiety of writing the best immaculate answer. As long as you write it, we're good to go. So we'll give you 2 minutes to gather your thoughts and put it in the chat. All right, so we have our first answer as a jumping off point. Minjun, do you want me to read that out?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, we're just going to use this as a jumping off point. And again, I would encourage you to gather your thoughts and write an answer using the STAR method, and then we'll ask Minjun to diagnose it for us. Okay, so the first answer is, from a product perspective, I would say I would involve designers all through the product development lifecycle and collaborate with them as partners. So what is good in this answer and how can we improve it, Minjun?
So I like the way where she mentioned about her roles on the companies. But if I want to improve it better, I usually like to answer these kind of working style questions. Definitely I will say like, I was the designer on blah blah team, and briefly talk about like what is the structure of the design team. So on my current team, I work closely with, we have like 5 individual contributors, 5 designer, 2 design manager, and 3 researcher on our team. So how do I work with my designer on the team is, first, so usually I will categorize my methods to answer this kind of working style question, I will say like, first, we have the weekly design sync up with the design team, where I'm going to share my updated design works with my designer to receive the feedback. And second, we also have the weekly summarize things where I will directly post what I did, what I learned for the past weeks on our Slack channel with the designer. Oh, sorry, there's a fire alarm on my apartment. Sorry about that. Just
it's not as loud as it is for you.
okay, yeah, sure. Let me continue. Yeah, sure. And the third method I'm using to collaborate with my peer designer is whenever there is some like key design decision I made for this project, even though the peer designer they didn't involve in my project directly, I will send out the email that I highlight what is the key design decision and the final solution I land on for this particular project. And I will also took a screenshot of the key final design screen, as well as I will add a link to the Figma file to make sure I have some sort of I increase the visibility of my work to share out with the designer. Yeah, so usually I will categorize into like 2 or 3 bullet point and using, because we want just using one method to work with the design team. We might using multiple different communication like channel to work with the design team. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So if I'm summarizing what you just said currently, Minjun, is to get into behavioral details. So first explain what the composition of the team is. I had these many designers, these many, etc. Then rundown of what you actually do. So what you do during team meetings, weekly summaries on Slack channel. And third, keep everybody informed through different channels like Figma, etc. And keep those people informed, even if they were not part of the decision-making process.
Correct. Okay, yeah, because I think if you can summarize it in a higher like different like communication channel, and the key takeaway here, the key point here is I'm willing to share out my work, and I'm willing to receive the feedback from the designer on my team. And the second is increase my visibility of the project I'm working on, because sometimes, especially if you are working in a larger company, sometimes even you are not directly with the designer on this specific project, but you might have some like interaction on some specific feature. So you guys need to align with. So make sure that every designer on your team, they like kind of know about in a high level what kind of project you are working on. Yeah.
All right, wonderful.
And make sure you give more specific like communication methods.
Keep receipts is what it is.
Yeah. Yes.
All right.
Sometimes I think some of the red flag I have ever seen is some people they didn't give more specific like step or way to talk about how I work with my peer designer. Instead, they just say, "Oh yeah, I'm willing to work with a peer designer. I'm happy to like that." They just talk to like general about like they are willing to work with designer without the specific step.
Yeah. So don't talk attitude, talk behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a behavioral interview, not an attitudinal interview.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So now let's take an example where you don't have experience working on a design team. So how can you extrapolate a non-design experience to answer this question?
I see.
So,
okay.
So one of the answers over here by Neha Dwivedi is, I've never worked on a design team specifically, but worked in product management roles. My role agnostic. My role to working with my peers would be really understanding the strengths of each of my peers and creating opportunities for us to all contribute in a way we enjoy working together. And also make sure me and my peers are all aligned on the
Mm-hmm.
main goals or
Mm.
outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that so there are two things. One thing is if you are transitioning into the UX design, and right now you are working in other like cross-functional team, for example, in the product management role or like engineer, and you want to become a UX designer. So you can talk about what is the communication methods you are using to facilitate the transparency and the conversation with your peers on your current team. And the second is, so you mentioned like, I would like to align with someone, blah, blah.
Mm,
If I'm the interviewer, the following up question I want to ask is what kind of method you are going to use to align with on the team. So you need to more like explain, talk about like how do you align with your team to
mm.
answer this question. Yeah, it's not about like I want to align with the team. Like how do you align with your team? Yeah, in your current company. Yeah.
Perfect. Did you want another answer, Minjun, or do we want to go to
I
the
think
next?
we might not have time. So because we also have two other questions I want to engage with
All
our
right.
audience. So I think two is good for
Perfect.
now. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for everybody who has written answers. Don't get disheartened if we don't pick your answers. It's good practice for you either
Yeah.
way.
We just need to like chat a little bit and share our experience. Yeah.
Sounds great. All right. Next question.
So the next category is like, what if you have the one-on-one behavioral question with the hiring manager here? So this is most likely the most important in the one-on-one session you might have during the product design interview. And during this conversation with your hiring manager, they are evaluate not just your hard skill and soft skill, including what we mentioned before, like with UX design, research, communication, collaboration. They also want to know about what is your vision for your career. How do you want to grow your career? It's more about your career development vision and how do you know about yourself as a designer and how do you want to grow yourself as a designer. I think this is a part of like a lot of like candidate, they forget the hiring manager, they will evaluate your career development vision as well during the behavioral question. So there are a couple slides here for hiring manager question. The first one is still around in a higher level, like how do you collaborate with the team? How do you communicate with different folks on the team, including like designer, like PM, engineer? They will be also curious about how do you communicate with your current manager? Like how do you run or conduct a one-on-one with your current manager? And they also will ask you sometimes, tell me about the time if you have a disagreement or conflict with your manager. So this is more about the soft skill evaluate. And then here is the most important part about the career development. I think because this is a lot of time candidate, they forget they will be asked these questions, so they don't prepare really well. So the question you might have, you might encounter will be like, what areas of skill you are looking to grow? So I think that is a perfect question to evaluate, like to evaluate your self-awareness. So do you know about like what is your weakness? Do you know about what is your opportunity areas? And do you know about what you want to grow next? Because they will always want to hire someone who have more like who can drive their career with intentionality. And the second question you might encounter is, what would you like to do in your next career? So it's a perfect time to talk about like how your skill set can be aligned with these future roles and what makes you excited about this next career in this specific team or company. And the same, a very similar question is, how would you see yourself in next 3 or 5 or 10 years? This kind of question is also a perfect time for you to think about like, how would you like to grow as a designer, even like maybe in the 5 or 10 year time frame you want to become a manager. And by answering these questions, the hiring manager, they can initiate a conversation about how they are going to support you to growth in next like 3 to 5 years on the team. Because for especially for the conversation with the hiring manager, it's also a two-way conversation about like, do I really want to grow my career on this team? Do I really want to work with this this future like design manager? Because design manager is always plays a key role on growing our career as an IC level designer on the team. The other question I find is they might also ask you the question about, tell me about the time you had to get out of your comfortable zone. I think this is also a perfect time to evaluate, like, are you willing to like growth? Like, are you willing to take the challenge? And how did you like solve the problem? Are you a problem solver in this kind of situation? And then they might also ask you the question about what did you do to grow and improve your opportunity areas? So what did you, so it's a perfect way to also know about like what is your, also knowing about your self-awareness, as well as like how did you like grow your career with intentionality. And I think I always love to answer the last question because I always have a lot of example and story to share with the hiring manager, and they definitely can see my growth with a lot of effort I made for the past like couple years. And the other thing for the career development question is more about why this company or why this particular role on this specific team. So the hiring manager will ask you a question about why would you like to join our team or join this company? This is a perfect time for you to bring your strengths, superpower, and skill sets into the answer. And also, if you can make it like more impressive, you can think about, you can do the research, like what is the company missions and how your skill set or your past experience that connects with the missions this company is aiming at. And the other kind of question is around like what aspect of the design is exciting to you and why. Usually here I will talk about what is my strengths areas or what is something I'm really interested in, but I don't have the opportunity to do right now. But in this future company, I have the opportunity to do. That is the reason I interview. I want to like join the team. So you can, it's more like, it's kind of similar to the first question, but if you answer differently, it can be like the other type of question. And they also ask you similarly, like what project is exciting to you and why. It's always about like skill set evaluation and career development growth. And the last question is, why would you like to leave your current company? So for answering this particular question, one of the red flag I see some candidate is making is they were talking too many about what didn't work really well in their current company, in their role. So it's more like they complain a lot about their current role and current company or the colleague there. It definitely bring up a lot of red flag if you're answering more like this way. So you need to transfer the perspective. You need to switch the perspective. I think here I will encourage you to think about like what kind of opportunity in this future company you are particularly passionate about, and how you can bring your experience and current skill set to contribute into the team. So it's more about like, I'm really excited for this future opportunity, and what the skill set I have here can contribute to this future opportunity. And what kind of specific areas I want to grow in the future, like on this specific team. So don't make it about like the complaining about your current job or anyone on your current company. Yeah. So the question here I want to interact with our audience is about, what would you like to do in your next career?
All right, great. Those were some really good pointers. I was making notes. Like previous time, put your answers in the chat, and because we're like 15 or 16 minutes away.
Yeah, and we still have a few slides, so maybe we can just grab one answer.
Yeah. The first one to plunk their answers in gets the golden ticket to get Minjun's personalized feedback. All right, so we have Sharon, and I'm going to read out her answer, Minjun, if you're ready. What would you like to do in your next career? Sharon says, I'm inspired to seek a new career challenge and an opportunity to use my organizational, technical, research, teaching, interpersonal, and leadership skills in a different capacity than I have in the past. The Learning Science Research Department at Newsella would be a great place. News LA, I don't know, what is that? Would be a great place where I can make an even bigger impact in a more robust and rigorous yet sustainable environment. That's what I put recently in an edtech company in an interview.
So yeah, first thing, I like the way where she talk about like what is her superpower and the strengths she could bring into this new role. And the second is, if I want to make it more like impressive to the hiring manager, I will do some slightly research about what kind of like specific like project or what kind of thing this role, like what kind of project this role will be working on, and then I will make the connection like with that. So in a higher level, I mentioned about my superpower, but like how I can just dive deep slightly a little bit more about how I can bring maybe my interaction design skill set to do some specific thing for a type of projects this role is going to hiring for. And so not just you can talk about the skill set you can bring into the team, but also you can talk about like maybe like, for instance, like if in your current company you didn't have much exposure to the collaboration with cross-functional team, so you want to change, you want to switch your career, you want to work more with the PM engineer, but you don't have to say like I didn't work a lot with the PM or my current company. However, what you can say here is, in my next career, I'm looking to work more closely with the PM engineer. I'm looking for I'm looking for like share my design works in a more collaborative environment. So you can switch something you didn't like, something you don't like in company to what I'm looking forward in my next career. So maybe like think about this way, you can have more than like one or two bullet point to answer this question. Because usually like whenever I answer the behavior question, I will share like three key bullet point I want to highlight to answer these questions. Yeah. So
perfect. Yeah. All right.
So let's jump into like the last two parts. So and the other one-on-one we might have is the PM and engineer one-on-one. And I think like for most of the PM engineer behavior question, that they are looking forward to your working style as a designer. What does your process look like? And most importantly, like how do you communicate and collaborate with the cross-functional team? So these are a list of the questions I summarize for when the PM having this kind of one-on-one behavior question with you, what they are going to ask you. So they will ask you like, what is your design process? And how do you work with the PM? How do you share your design work with the PM? And tell me about the time when you have a conflict and disagreement with your PM. And also tell me about the time if you made a mistake or if you have a failures on some of the project you work before. And they might also ask you a question about, tell me about the time you didn't meet the deadline for some project before. So this is the PM question. And the last part is the engineering question. So how do you prefer to work with the engineer, and how do you share you work with an engineer? And for the engineer part, what is something like they will ask you like, how did you handle the design works with the engineer as well? And sometimes they also curious about like, what kind of constraint did you encounter in your project? I think in this particular project, they want to know about like, as a designer, are you open to listen to an engineer as well? Are you willing to take their feedback? Are you willing to hear like what is the technical constraints we might have for our design solution, design direction here? And the last thing is also very common. Like, tell me about a time when you have a complete disagreement with your engineer. So in this question, it's more about what if I have a technical constraint for this solution, and how did you make a balance between like technical need and user need and business need as well. So how did you balance different feedback from the stakeholder as well as the user need? So the last simple questions I want to interact here is, how did you handle the conflict with the PM engineer? I think this is the most important interview question. And for this specific question, I encourage you to prepare at least 2 or 3 stories about like, how do you handle the conflict with PM or an engineer folks. So feel free to type the answer here. And because of the time constraint for our talk, we will just grab one example, or grab one answer here.
Sounds great. So we'll wait for 50 seconds. So type as fast as you can, because
Or
we
just, or just you can feel free to share any thought. It doesn't have to be a completely like answer.
Yeah. Because we do want to keep some time at the end for a Q&A round, right, Minjun?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so if you have any pressing questions, this is your chance. So put a story for us in the chat, and then we'll take that, diagnose it, and then jump right into Q&A.
No, before the Q&A, I also have the last
one. Okay, all right.
Tips for answering. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We don't want to miss that. All right. Sherry has said, number 1, communicate with them before. So I think Sherry is going more in the lines of what could have. Okay, Sharon also says, find a common interest with the PM engineers and build a relationship to make sure what their thoughts and real needs are. So they're giving us suggestions.
Yeah. So definitely. So in order to answer this, like how do I handle the conflict disagreement question, I always using the STAR method, where I will talk briefly about like, so this is a project I was working at blah blah company, and the project was blah blah. And during this project, I need to working on an onboarding flow for the user to sign up for like blah blah membership. And during so I talk about the situation and attacks, and then I will talk about the challenge. Like, so during when I do the design operation for the onboarding flow for the user, I did a quick user testing to figure out what is the right direction for my design direction. So I share the result with the team, where I have 2 potential options. One is blah blah, and second is blah blah. So the user like option A because of blah blah. However, when I share with the team, the engineer proposed that right now we didn't have the design system component for option A. They don't have the time to build up the component for option A. So we need to go for the option B, even though the user might not interested in the option B. So in this situation, like as a designer, how did I solve the conflict? That is, you need to more specify like what did you do right now. So what I usually will say is, after I hear the engineering feedback, I want to know about like what is the the reason that they couldn't build a new component, like how long it will take for them to build this particular component. So by understanding, so I want to dive deep into the why, other than I say, no, we should go for option A. And then I will, so after I hear about the reason from the engineer, I will so here's the next step I'm doing. First thing, I trying to explore another option that can balance these technical constraints as well as the user need, because blah, blah, blah. And the second is I might also reach out to the design system team to ask their capability to build up this new component if possible. So this is the action, the next step I'm taking. And then the result will be so after I chatting with the design system team and I do the exploration, I land on blah, blah solution where design system team might agree with building out this new component for us within blah, blah time frames. So I checking with our engineering team. So they agree to leverage the new component once the design system team was built up this new one. And sometimes, so this is a result, but sometimes I will add just one sentence of the lessons about this, about how did I handle the conflict in this particular scenario, because it's very common for most of the company. So let's jump into the last piece. What is my tips for preparing for this behavior question and successfully answer this question? The first thing I want to highlight is build up your own libraries. So make sure that you are able to collect different interview questions and categorize them into different segments by design manager, by hiring manager, by the peer designer, by the PM or engineer. So in this way, you can build out your own interview question bank, interview question library, and then trying to at least write down 1 or 2 answer for each of your question you have, especially if you are new, if you are very early on in your career. Definitely ask you to write down the answer to better answer this behavior question. The second is just practice. I will encourage you, especially the junior designer who might not have so many experience working with cross-functional team or doing the interview. Definitely practice a lot. And then when you are doing this interview session, make sure you double check your audio and camera before you jump into the session, because sometimes I hear a lot of background noise when the candidate are answering the question, and be smelled on the way during the interview questions. And every time when these people ask the question, even though this is something you already prepare, make sure that you pause for second. So it's a way you can try to think and organize your thoughts before you give the answer to them, even you prepare for this question. And make sure you make the eyes contacts, even in this kind of remote interview session. And the last thing I want to say is be confident. Yeah, because you already prepare all these questions, you should be confident during your future interview. And the last piece is, so I often mention my cat in the beginning of my presentation. However, unfortunately, my kitty passed away this Monday with an unexpected heart disease. So here I want to use this chance to sending my and the rest of the audience best wish and love to my 3-year-old kitty Kirby. It's very sad. I'm still trying to process this news. So yeah, and thank you so much for all of you to join this session. And we might just using maybe in a 5-10 minute left to answer the rest of the audience questions. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minjun. There's so many messages coming in for you and for the little kitty. She's in our thoughts, and thank you again for being here and spending time with us, and for this valuable information. I made a lot of notes. I know we are right on time, Naimisha. Do
Mm-hmm.
you have 10 more minutes that we can stretch it and get some questions in?
Yeah, totally. Go for it. I mean, for those of you who have to drop off, it is a recorded session, so we'll be sending the information. But yeah, please go ahead.
All right, so let's keep it a hard stop at 8:10.
Yeah.
So we have 10 more minutes. Minjun, is that okay with you?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, great. So I'm just gonna read out the questions and we're gonna go through them however many we can in 10 minutes.
Okay.
All right. So as a student, is it possible to break into big tech with a great portfolio but without prior experience in the industry?
That's a great question. So there are a couple advice I can share right now. One is definitely yes, even though you don't have the industrial experience, if you are looking for especially the UX design intern or like the intern job, even you don't have the previous industrial experience, you might get some interview or you might get the offer at the end. The second is right now, like not just the intern job, but also the full-time job, they all very competitive. If you know about like, I don't have any industrial experience, you should start to like looking for even some volunteer works or hackathon project where you can work with the PM, engineer, or other cross-functional team. Because if you have a great portfolio that indicate you have a strong foundation in UX design and intention or visual design, a lot of time they will ask you the behavioral question about how did you handle the conflict with the PM and engineer. So it's more like a chicken and egg problem. You have to like do something right now to help you build up some example and the story where you can share with the hiring team later on about how did you work with these folks. So definitely some of the easier way to get more exposure to the collaboration is finding some volunteer job or join some like hackathon so you can work with the engineer for and PM for 2 or 3 days. Yes, so this is my advice.
Wonderful. I had a question for you, Minjun. So there are some questions that you said, like, think about a time when you had to step out of your comfort zone, how did you grow, etc. Some of these questions are life questions, and we are trying to demonstrate ourselves as well-rounded human beings. Like you shared today that you like coffee and food. So you're trying to bring your entire self to these behavioral questions. So I'm wondering, how do we navigate between answering these questions just based on our role as an employer, or can we use some life experiences to answer these questions? What would you suggest?
So for me, like based on my experience, most likely I will use the example that demonstrate the skill set that can be bring into my role. So for example, like I'm very active, I'm very engaging with the design communities or other community where I'm often become a speaker or the host for blah, blah, blah events. So even it's not directly related to the product project. However, it can demonstrate my like speaking, like public speaking skill, presentation skill, where I can leverage into my future work. So it's more about the skill set like you got or you gain from like any other project or any other life story that can bring into this particular role. And the second one is I just make it up. Like, for example, if you are working on a pet insurance company, and because I'm experiencing the loss of my kitty, so I might build up such connection and talk about like how I'm passionate about this specific job as a UX designer on the pet insurance company because of my own life experience.
That's great advice. All right, thank you. I recently got a behavioral question that I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on. The question was, what could I do to piss you off?
Could you explain this question a little bit? I don't really understand.
So what could I, so if a PM is asking you, what would it take for me to upset you?
I
So
see.
how would you answer this question?
I think they trying to understand from the PM point, they trying to understand like what what kind of conflict you often encounter during your current job, like make you angry or upset about collaboration. And the second is like, especially for this kind of question, is not very like usual to see during interview. I will always ask some clarifying question before I giving the answer. So I will say, I will ask the more likely, I will ask the follow questions like, okay, this question is very interesting. I want to know about like how do you work with the designer in the daily job? Just I want to just make, if I feel like this question is hard to answer, I always just ask some follow-up question before I give them the answer, because usually they can give you more scenario or the expectation they are looking forward from this answer, because that one is very broad and unusual, and I will ask more like why question before I give them the answer. And it can also show you as a designer, you are not jumping into the solution directly. You are really thoughtful. You really think about, like, you really want to get more context before you give your stakeholder any other next step.
That's great. So you don't always have to answer a question with an answer. You can always answer a question with a question.
Yeah.
That shows your depth of curiosity and also the fact that you're thinking through this, because they're trying to understand how you think
Yeah.
as well.
Especially this method is very useful for answering some very hard question you never have before. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I'm getting a trend from these questions, and I'm going to lump them up together.
Yeah.
So it seems like a couple of our attendees today are just breaking into UX and are on the junior side of things, who could be a student breaking into UX, or who could have had experience in another field like fashion. And then this is their first behavioral interview job. So how do they delicately demonstrate that they're excited about this job, they've done the homework, and also own up to the fact that, hey, I'm here to gain some experience, and this job is going to give me the experience. So how can I answer questions about experiences? What advice would you have?
Yeah, there are a couple things. First, like, even you are coming from other different like industries, you definitely were working on some project that is a group project or collaborative project. You have this kind of human interaction with other, like the other sometimes not, cannot sometimes not the PM or engineer, but you can still using this kind of story as the answer, or as the story for answering this kind of behavior question around communication and collaboration. How did you collaborate with blah blah, like people in your own like areas? And the second is, I think this is a question you need to think like more deeply, like what is your strength and superpower, like as a designer, like what kind of strength or unique strength or background you have maybe in the fashion design that can be bring into the UX design field. So trying to make the connection between your past experience into the current job is very important. And I think like this is also like, if you really want to make yourself stand out from other candidates, always leveraging your strengths, maybe two strengths you are super good at. So you always like keep echoed and highlight during the interview sessions. Yeah, and the third thing is, again, like if you haven't graduated from, you are still in the school, or you still in the very early on like transition into the UX design, there are tons of the volunteer opportunity, or someone, maybe your friend, they want to break into the tech industry as a PM. Maybe both of you can do the side project together, so you can be experiencing like how are you going to work with the PM or engineer folks in a side project environment. Yeah.
Right. I'm just making these notes and I'm putting it in the chat. So those were great. Find out volunteer opportunities, hack a project, collaborate with your friends, do whatever it takes, and you have what it takes to break into UX and ace your behavioral interview. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And as I said, you've set yourself apart just by being here and staying over time. And I do want to stress how thankful we are to Minjun for coming here against all odds, and our warm thoughts are with you, and
Yes.
we cannot thank you enough for your valuable experience. We all learned a lot.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was nice to like interact with all of you, and hope to see like all of you in maybe my future session, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Yeah, thank you so much. It was wonderful
Thank
session.
you. Thank you, Naimisha, as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.